Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Premier Injuries Daily Roundup. Now, game week 35 was all about the hamstring injury, and it certainly came as no surprise we're coming to the end of a long season, congested fixture schedule caused primarily by the Winter World Cup, and also those teams who are playing catch-up in terms of their fixtures due to domestic cup competitions and their European involvement. I'm thinking Manchester United and, of course, Brighton. So where better to start than the Seagulls and Solly Marsh. He's actually been on the bench for the last two games for Brighton. Bit of a surprise and a big disappointment for owners. Now, he pulled up chasing down Dwight McNeil as Everton went on the rampage on Monday. Now, typically, this is a very common mechanism of injury. It suggests that there could be a tear, that's just pretty high up, and ordinarily and typically speaking, this would keep a player out for at least 2 to 3 weeks. Now, I say typically, we're waiting to learn the full extent of that problem. The player will be sent for an MRI scan, and we should expect an update from Roberto De Zerbi. However, he's a major doubt for both double game weeks now. They dig him 36 against Arsenal and Newcastle aren't very appealing, but certainly the ones in 37 were attracting a little bit of interest. But I'd be very surprised if Solly Marsh, just given on what we've seen, was back before the end of the season. Fingers crossed, hopefully it was just a precaution, but I do fear the worst. One of their opponents as part of that game week 36 is Newcastle. And we've had a little bit of a positive update with regards to Sean Longstaff. Now, that was a foot problem that he picked up at Goodison Park, a challenge that went unpunished by James Tarkowski. Initial reports suggested that he could potentially, it was season over, with fears that he had maybe broken a bone in his foot. Now, the first specialist report came back a little bit inconclusive. He went for a second on Tuesday. Now, it's good news. There is no fracture in that foot. However, he's a major doubt for the game against Leeds at Ellen Road. But fingers crossed, he could still play a part in maybe game week 37 or possibly on the final day, game week 38. We need him. We miss him. And that's something I never thought would be seen. He's a big miss in that middle of the park, particularly as we've seen at the weekend against Arsenal. For Manchester City, expect heavy rotation again from the citizens this weekend. Pep made 7 last time out against Leeds. There was 6 changes at the Bernabeu. Now, with that second leg tie coming up after the match at Goodison, we could expect Guardiola to make wholesale changes again. One of those players that we're not expecting to be involved is Nathan Ake. He had recently returned from a hamstring problem, spent a fortnight out on the sidelines, but unfortunately limped off with a recurrence or a re-injury last weekend against Leeds. Now, again, typically when you see, we know it's high re-injury, high recurrence rates, particularly within that first 28 days of a return to sport or a return to play. And inherently what happens is if it's took around about maybe 2 to 3 weeks, then you can typically add another 7 to 10 days on potentially for their return to play. So again, that calls into question his domestic campaign. Another hamstring problem on Monday was Southampton centre-back Bella Kocher. It didn't look great at the time. He was carried off by the backroom staff, and he was also seen leaving the City ground on crutches. Now, of course, this could always be a bit of a precautionary measure. You don't want to push the player or strain anything or cause any further damage, exacerbate that issue until it's been fully assessed. But like I say, it's very difficult at this stage of the campaign to see how those players would potentially return. Gabriel Mongalves was past fit for Arsenal at the weekend. He took a heavy knock on the ankle. That called into question his availability, but of course, he played up at St James's Park, and he was partnered alongside Kivo with Rob Holding, the player to miss out. Now, there's no improvement as of yet to William Saliba. Again, major question marks and doubts whether he could return this season. So it could be that Kivo and Gabriel Mongalves are those two central pairings for those remaining fixtures. Elsewhere within that Arsenal team, there was a little bit of surprise with the decision by Mikel Arteta to go with Jorginho over Thomas Partey, but thus far it has proved to be a success, and I can't see that changing this weekend either. Arsenal were brilliant at St James's Park. Unfortunately for us, fully deserved that win after we didn't get those decisions early on. For Tottenham, Ryan Mason, we've seen Clement Lenge go off with a shoulder problem at the weekend. That was, of course, a 1-0 win over Crystal Palace. Now, Ryan Mason did tweak his formation ever so slightly. Typically, we see Spurs set up in that 3-4-3, which was under Conte and Christian Stellini. We did see that little bit of a 3-4-3 when Tottenham were in possession, but out of possession, we've seen more of a 4-4-2, 4-3-3 with Ben Davies sitting a little bit deeper, just to make Tottenham a little bit harder to break down. Now, if Clement Lenge is past fit, and I understand it is just a minor issue, then we could expect to see probably an unchanged team. It was Eric Dyer that missed out last weekend. The surprise return of Emerson Royal, slightly ahead of schedule. We also seen East Basuma back on the bench. Ryan Mason, in the build-up to that game during his pre-match press conference, had suggested that, fingers crossed, we will hopefully see him before the end of the season. So he's done really well there. For Wolves, they more or less guarantees their top flight status with a win over Aston Villa. Hugo Bueno, the Spaniard of left back, missed out from the match day squad altogether. Julian Lopetegui confirmed that it was more of a tactical decision, with Totti, the player, coming in, and of course he scored. So don't expect Bueno back anytime soon. For Chelsea, Frank Lampard got his first win as Blue Boss, but he will need to do some tinkering this weekend. I talked about hamstring injuries. Ben Chilwell was one of those players to suffer a setback. And again, we're waiting to understand the full extent of the problem, but there's question marks over his availability. Wesley Fofana was a player that missed out last weekend for Badiashile, who came in. That was as a precautionary measure. Fofana complained of tightness or discomfort in his hamstring while travelling down for that away match, and that's why he was omitted from the squad. Now, there could be a slight tactical or formational shift just given those injuries. We're waiting to Mark Cucurella is a player who was around about 7 to 10 days away last weekend, so that makes him would be a close call. Like I say, it might just come a little bit sooner. Game week 37 could be more realistic for him. But that's your roundup for now. We're going to follow this one up with another short video, just talking about rotation around this stage of the season and how we need to be careful. We do see a rise and numbers inherently increase. But like I say, we'll provide more detailed analysis. So keep your eyes and ears peeled. And of course, you can always check out the premierinjuries.com injury table, or reach out to either myself or Jason_R_McKenna on Twitter to answer any questions.